Hello YouTube. Today we are going to discuss a very high yield topic, that is the autonomic nervous system. Now one needs to know some high yield facts about this topic if one wants to appear in the examination and answer questions related to the autonomic nervous system. I'm going to go briefly over each and every aspect of the autonomic nervous system, and to some extent I'll also explain the clinical correlates so that you guys in the end can mix it up all together and in the end of course answer the questions and get a basic concept of what this topic is all about. So moving on, the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is basically divided into two systems. That is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is further subdivided into splanchnic sympathetic nervous system and the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. And thirdly, the non-sympathetic nervous system, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, this splanchnic sympathetic and the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system is further subdivided, which I will show you just now. The splanchnic sympathetic nervous system is further subdivided into 3 to 4 categories. That is, first of all, the cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, which is first of all, which you see over here. The second one is the thoracoabdominal splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, which you see on the second one. And thirdly is the sacral splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. And last but not the least, to some extent, the lumbar part also contributes. Now, apart from the splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, we have the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. Now, the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system has been categorized in the form of a mnemonic, which you see over here, that is the TAD, T-A-D, T for through, A for ascend, and D for descend. I'll explain what this mnemonic means after a few minutes, but for now just learn this mnemonic, as it will prove to be helpful later on when the things get complex. So we just learned that the sympathetic nervous system is divided into splanchnic and the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, and the splanchnic is further subdivided into cardiopulmonary, thoracoabdominal, sacral, and lumbar, whereas the non-splanchnic is divided into TAD. What this means, I'll explain to you later. The non-sympathetic nervous system, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, we will also discuss about that in a few minutes. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is further subdivided into craniosacral outflow. The craniosacral outflow includes the nervi arigentes, that is the S2, S3, and S4, which is also known as the pelvic splanchnic nerve. And secondly, we have the cranial parasympathetic outflow. Just to make it easy and quick for you guys, the sympathetic nervous system starts from the thoracic 1 to lumbar 2 nerves, whereas the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system is also known as the thoracolumbar outflow, and the parasympathetic nervous system is also known as the craniosacral outflow. Craniosacral outflow including the nervi arigentes, which is the pelvic splanchnic nerve, and the cranial outflow. I will explain what these means in a few minutes. Now moving on. We have certain configurations of the splanchnic and the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. Broadly speaking, I have divided the splanchnic and the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system configurations into 4 parts. Configuration 1, which you see over here, and configuration 2, which you see over here. 3 and 4 configurations you will see in the next slide. Now, configurations 1 and 2, which you see right in front of you, are part of the splanchnic nervous system. Splanchnic sympathetic outflow. Now, Splanchnic sympathetic outflow can have two different configurations. As you see over here, the Splanchnic outflow always originates from the lateral gray horn of the spinal cord. As you see over here in the configuration 1, also in the configuration 2 over here. Alright. Now you might be asking, what is this pink thing that I've drawn over here? And what is this structure that is in front of the spinal cord? Now understand two basic concepts. What is this? This is the spinal cord. And what is besides this? This is the paravertebral ganglionic chain. Alright? The paravertebral ganglionic chain runs besides the spinal cord, whereas the preganglionic ganglions are located near to the viscera in which the sympathetic nervous system supplies. So you might be asking, what is the difference between parasympathetic ganglions and paravertebral ganglions and prevertebral ganglions? The paravertebral ganglions are located just besides the spinal cord. There are two chains which are located on each side of the spinal cord, and the prevertebral ganglions are located near to the viscera in which they supply. Alright. Now in configuration 1, the efferent axons, they start in the anterior root. Over here you see, just follow my thumb, or to make it more easy, I'll be using a pen for you guys. It starts in the anterior root, and then it enters the mixed spinal nerve, and then before just going on and continuing through, it goes through the white ramus, white rami communicans. After going to the white rami communicans, it synapses with a postganglionic neuron and the axon leaves. Now just bear with me for a minute or two. I'll explain what does this white rami and the gray rami means. Alright. Now in the second configuration, you see that the efferent neuron axons leave the anterior nerve root. They come into the mixed spinal nerve, and then after going into the white rami communicans, they enter the paravertebral ganglion, and without synapsing, they continue as preganglionic neurons or preganglionic axons, and the synapse over here into the prevertebral ganglion, not into the paravertebral ganglion. They synapse into the prevertebral ganglion, which is located close to the viscera in which they supply the innervation. Now what is the white rami communicans and what is the gray rami communicans? White rami communicans is actually a communication which carries the axons from the nerve to the paravertebral ganglion. And what is gray rami communicans? Gray rami communicans is actually the total opposite of white rami communicans, which carries the axons from the paravertebral ganglionic chain to the spinal nerve. Here you don't see any gray rami communicans carrying the nerve fibers back to the main spinal nerve, because in these configurations there is no role of the gray rami communicans. Only the white matter carries the axons in the first configuration, where they synapse with the postsynaptic neurons and they carry the sensation or the sensation away. Now from over here, the postganglionic neurons or axon carry the sensation, and over here in the second configuration, the preganglionic neurons or axons continue as such and do not synapse in the paravertebral ganglion and continue to synapse in the prevertebral ganglion, which is located close to the viscera in which they supply the innervation. Now this first configuration is part of the cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, and the second configuration is part of the thoracoabdominal, splanchnic, sympathetic nervous system. And as a whole, these two configurations that are part of the splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. All right. Now moving on to the third and the fourth configurations. Now the third and the fourth configurations, these are actually part of the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. Now I told you a mnemonic a few minutes back for the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, that was through, ascend and descend, which was the TAD. Now what happens in the configuration 3? You see, just before starting these configurations, I would like you to examine that in both of these configurations there is the involvement of gray MI communicants. Alright, so in configuration 3, this is the configuration of the through and through. That is, the axons go from the white MI communicants to the paravertebral ganglion. The synapse at that specific level go back into the main spinal nerve through the gray MI communicants, and they continue in the ventral rami to continue to supply the part of the skin and the sebaceous glands and the erector spinae muscles over there. Alright. In the configuration 4, we see that the efferent neurons, they go into the main spinal nerve, and through the white MI communicants they enter the paravertebral ganglionic chain, and after entering, they do not synapse at that level, that is not synapsing through that level. They ascend or descend from that level to supply the structures above and below respectively. When they ascend, they may supply structures of the head and the neck, such as the skin of the eye, which can be explained due to the ptosis which is seen in Horner syndrome, which is due to the damage to the cervical sympathetic ganglion. Alright, and when they move below and when they descend below, they may supply the organs such as the urinary bladder or the male genitourinary viscera. Alright. Now moving on, we have discussed what is the efferent outflow and the different configurations in the sympathetic nervous system, which may be subdivided into the splanchnic and the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. The splanchnic ones including the cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system and the thoracolumbar splanchnic sympathetic nervous system to the major extent. Alright. And the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, they are the TAD, which I told you before, that is through the level, above, below, or ascend and descend. Now, how does the system actually work? I'll be explaining with the help of this diagram. Over here you can see I've written cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, and over here down below is the thoracoabdominal splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. Now what actually happens? In the cardiopulmonary sympathetic splanchnic nervous system, the major efferent outflow is from the T1 to the T4, that is from thoracic 1 to the thoracic 4. Now I explained a few minutes ago that in the cardiopulmonary sympathetic splanchnic nervous system, the preganglionic neurons synapse with the postganglionic neurons in the paravertebral ganglion, whereas in the thoracoabdominal splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neurons, they continue as such and they synapse in the peripheral ganglions, which are called the prevertebral ganglions, which are located close to the viscera in which they supply the innervation. Alright, now having these concepts clear, we'll move forward. The major cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system is supplied from thoracic 1 till thoracic 4. the postganglionic, splanchnic, sympathetic nerves, they move over here, and here you can see I've drawn the heart and I've drawn the lung. Now they synapse with the different nerve plexuses which might be located in this region. Alright? The different nerve plexuses of the cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system may be named according to the viscera. For example, the postganglionic neurons of this outflow may synapse on the cardiac plexus, they may synapse on the pulmonary plexus, they may synapse on the esophageal plexuses. These are the three major plexuses in which the thoracic 1 to thoracic 4 sympathetic splanchnic outflow synapses before supplying the actual viscera. Alright. Now moving on to the thoracoabdominal splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. Thoracoabdominal splanchnic sympathetic nervous system has been broadly divided into three small parts. That is the GSP, the LSP, and the least. Might be thinking this is getting a little bit too complex. No need to worry, I'll just break it down for you guys. GSP means the greater splanchnic nerve, the LSP means the lesser splanchnic nerve, and of course you see here the full form of it, that is the least splanchnic nerve. Now the thoracoabdominal outflow is from the T5 to T12, alright? But the subdivision that I've drawn in front of you, the GSP or the greater splanchnic nerve, is formed from the thoracic 5 to thoracic 9. The lesser splanchnic nerve is formed from the T10 to T11, and the least splanchnic nerve is formed from the T12, that is the thoracic 12 outflow. Now just don't give much attention to the part down below which I've written as the pelvic splanchnic nerve, because that's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, and I'll be explaining that a bit later. First of all, let's just focus on the sympathetic nervous system. Alright, the sympathetic nervous system broadly divided into thoracic 1 to thoracic 4, comprising the cardiopulmonary sympathetic nervous system, and the T5 to T12 comprising the thoracoabdominal sympathetic nervous system, which is further divided into T5 to T9 constituting the greater splanchnic nerve, the T10 to T11 constituting the lesser splanchnic nerve, and the T12 constituting the least splanchnic nerve. What is this? Now what does this GSP, LSP, and least actually do as they course forward? First of all, the outflow from the T5 to T9, let's just make it clear. Over here in the cardiopulmonary, that was the postganglionic fibers, but over here these are the preganglionic fibers. Alright, the preganglionic fibers which had not synapsed in the paravertebral ganglion, they continues as such in the form of these nerves, that is the GSP, LSP, and least. They continued as such in the form of preganglionic axons, and they synapsed in the prevertebral, not the para, but the prevertebral ganglion, which are located close to the viscera. Alright. Now what are those ganglions? I'll be explaining just in a few minutes. Alright. Now we are here and continuing upon the different ganglion in which the GSP, LSP, and the least splanchnic nerves synapse. Now over here on the top you've seen I've written abdominothoracic sympathetic preganglionic splanchnic nerve fibers. I'll break it down for you. Abdominothoracic, which shows the exact location of the outflow. Sympathetic means that it is part of the sympathetic nervous system, of course. Preganglionic means that it is preganglionic because it had not synapsed in the paravertebral ganglion, as I had explained a few minutes earlier. Splanchnic nerve fibers. Alright. Now the GSP formed from the T5 to T9. The lesser splanchnic formed from T10 to T11, and the T12 constituting the least splanchnic nerve. Now these little circles, as you see over here, I've drawn. Now these are the prevertebral ganglion, not the paravertebral ganglionic, not part of the paravertebral ganglionic chain, which are located in the form of dual columns on both sides of the spinal cord. These are the prevertebral ganglions located close to the viscera in which they supply. For example, the GSP, being the preganglionic fiber, it synapses with the celiac ganglion. The lesser splanchnic nerve, it synapses with the superior mesenteric ganglion and the aorticorenal ganglion. Similarly, the least splanchnic nerve synapses in the aorticorenal ganglion. Now, broadly speaking, the celiac ganglion supplies the structures which are located in the foregut, or which have developed from the foregut. The midgut structures are part of the synapse and the transmission from the superior mesenteric ganglion, and the hindgut structures are supplied from the synapse from the synapse in the inferior mesenteric ganglion. All right. Now, to some extent, you see over here that I've written some other ganglion and plexuses names as well below the aorticorenal ganglion, which are the superior hypogastric plexus and the inferior hypogastric plexus. The superior hypogastric plexus, inferior hypogastric plexus are actually very important, and they constitute part of the sympathetic nervous supply to different organs. And the sacral splanchnic sympathetic outflow synapses in the inferior hypogastric plexus. The inferior hypogastric plexus supplies the sympathetic innervations to organs such as the kidney, uterus. All right. Now over here at the bottom of the page, you see I've written preganglionic and the postganglionic. Now this is the prevertebral ganglion. All right. The preganglionic axons, they come and they synapse in the peripheral prevertebral ganglion, and after that postsynaptic axons, they innervate the target organs. Over here, the superior hypogastric plexus, this is basically a continuation of the aorticorenal plexus. All right. You can say that aorticorenal, it further subdivides into the left and the right branches. Yeah, the aorticorenal ganglion, or the plexus, it actually continues as such to become the superior hypogastric plexus. The superior hypogastric plexus in turn divides into the left and the right branches. Now these plexuses actually have different fibers. It may be carrying the parasympathetic fibers as well as the sympathetic fibers. Alright, it may also be carrying the general visceral afferent fibers. For example, the inferior hypogastric plexus, it carries the sympathetic fibers, the parasympathetic fibers, and the general visceral afferent fibers. Alright, just don't confuse yourselves too much. In some books, they may be written interchangeably, sometimes the ganglions, sometimes the plexuses, whereas to understand it exactly, you just have to know that the greater splanchnic, the lesser splanchnic, and the least splanchnic, they synapse with these ganglions, which are located in their corresponding plexuses. For example, GSP synapses in the celiac ganglion, which is located in the celiac plexus. Alright. Similarly, LSP, or the lesser splanchnic nerve, it synapses with the superior mesenteric ganglion, which is located in the superior mesenteric plexus. Similarly, the least splanchnic nerve, it synapses with the aortic renal ganglion, which is located in the plexus located around the aorta. And after that, the postganglionic branches, they continue to supply the organs accompanying the arteries, such as the lesser curvature of the stomach is supplied by the right and the left gastric arteries, and the postganglionic nerve fibers accompany those according to the part of the organ in which they are supplying. All right. Now there are certain exceptions. The sweat glands, the kidneys, and the adrenal glands make up those exceptions. First of all, let's make it clear. The parasympathetic nervous system releases acetylcholine at its presynaptic end as well as its postsynaptic end. Alright, the presynaptic end being in the first synapse, and the postsynaptic neurotransmission occurs at the place of the visceral innervation, where the nerve fibers continue to supply the viscera. Alright. All the parasympathetic nervous system release acetylcholine at the pre and the postsynaptic neurotransmission, and all the sympathetic nervous system also release acetylcholine at the presynaptic transmission, but at the postsynaptic transmission these exceptions come into play. At the postsynaptic transmission of the sympathetic nervous system to the sweat gland, they are going to release acetylcholine instead of noradrenaline. Alright, the normality for the sympathetic nervous system is to release adrenaline and the noradrenaline at the postsynaptic transmission, but in the case of sweat glands, the sympathetic nervous system release acetylcholine at the postsynaptic transmission. In case of kidneys, the postsynaptic sympathetic nervous system releases dopamine instead of norepinephrine. And in case of adrenal glands are actually a lot interesting, and I'd like to explain it into much or not much into a few detail. The greater splanchnic nerve that I explained earlier, which is formed from the combination of T5 to T9, it continues as such in the form of preganglionic nerve fiber. It goes through the cilia ganglion. After passing through the cilia ganglion, it does not even synapse with the prevertebral ganglion. Alright, it does not synapse with any ganglion at all in its way, the entire course. The adrenal glands or the suprarenal glands itself acts as a form of a ganglion. Alright, the preganglionic nerve fibers continue all the way in the greater splanchnic nerve from their origin to the adrenal glands. After reaching the adrenal glands, the presynaptic transmission synapses with the chromaffin cells, which in turn releases the noradrenaline and the adrenaline directly. Alright, now just recapping it all. The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system comprising the splanchnic as well as the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system. This as a whole is called the lumbosacral outflow. The parasympathetic outflow, on the other hand, is known as the craniosacral outflow. The splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, it constitutes the thoracoabdominal and the cardiopulmonary splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, while the non-splanchnic sympathetic nervous system, it constitutes TAD, that is through ascend or descend. Similarly, the non-sympathetic nervous system is